If you spend a single night of love with a stranger, would you dare work for him without telling him who you are? April Summers never thought one night could haunt her for so long. It was a year ago when she stepped into a dimly lit bar on the coldest night Chicago had seen in years. Snow clung to her secondhand coat as she pushed through the heavy wooden door, her eyes red from tears she could no longer hide. She only needed warmth, maybe a quiet corner to disappear into. But that night, the universe decided she would be seen. Sitting 2 bar stools away was Damien Blackwell, the man who made headlines for closing million-dollar deals before breakfast and breaking off engagements before dinner. She'd seen his face in magazines her roommate used to flip through, whispering rumors about the billionaire who never smiled. In real life, he looked even colder than the snow outside, a man untouchable behind a half-empty glass of bourbon and a loosened tie. Their eyes met in the mirror behind the bar. Maybe it was the way April looked like she had nowhere else to run, or maybe it was the emptiness behind Damien's stare that drew them together. He did not smile. He only lifted his glass and ordered another, gesturing for her to join him with the smallest tilt of his head. They sat together without speaking for nearly an hour, 2 strangers breathing in each other's loneliness. When he finally leaned close, April could smell the rain that clung to his coat, the expensive cologne that did not hide how tired he was. "You look like you need to forget something," he said, voice low and careless. April almost laughed at the honesty. Maybe she did. Maybe he did too. When he asked her to leave with him, she did not say no. She did not ask his name. He did not ask hers. There were no questions, no promises, just the heat of his hand on hers as they stepped back into the storm and into the black car waiting at the curb. In the back seat, neither spoke. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat, could see his eyes watching her reflection in the dark window. He brushed his fingers against hers once, testing her. She did not pull away. The hotel downtown smelled of old marble and quiet secrets. He booked the penthouse without blinking. When the elevator doors closed, the world shrank to the hush of his breath against her hair. That night was soft and rough all at once, made of snow melting against overheated skin, and the truth she did not dare speak. It was her first time, but she did not want pity. She only wanted to feel wanted for once. When she woke before dawn, Damien's arm was draped across her waist, heavy with the weight of a man who never let anyone close. She slipped free without a sound, pulled on her coat, and left behind nothing but the faint lipstick stain on his shirt collar. She told herself it was just one night, that he would forget her by morning. Maybe she would forget him too. But dreams have a cruel way of clinging to the living. 1 year later, April stood at the iron gates of a lakeside mansion north of Chicago, gripping the handle of her second-hand suitcase so tight her fingers ached. Her friend Maya had promised her a job here as a maid for the Blackwell family. The pay was enough to keep her little brother's hospital bills from swallowing her whole. She thought she could handle anything for him. What she did not know was that behind those gates waited the same man whose breath still haunted her sleep, the same man who would look her straight in the eye and never guess who she really was. April Summers thought she could hide forever. She was wrong. April Summers had never stepped inside a house like the Blackwell estate before. From the moment she walked past the gates, she felt her cheap sneakers sinking into a different world. The main driveway was long and curved through tall iron lamps and rows of trimmed hedges. Beyond them, the mansion sat by Lake Michigan like an ancient secret, its stone walls half hidden behind old oak trees that whispered with the wind. She kept her head down when the butler opened the front door, afraid her wide eyes would give away how small she felt among the marble floors and endless glass windows. The staff wing was tucked at the far end of the house, separated by a narrow corridor that smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh laundry. Maya, her friend, and the only reason she even got this job, met her there with a hug that April needed more than she wanted to admit. Maya was older by a few years, kind but sharp enough to survive in places April could barely imagine. She had worked for the Blackwell since she was 18, starting as a part-time maid and now supervising the housekeeping team. April knew Maya was only leaving because she was 6 months pregnant with her second child. That meant April had to be perfect, at least until Maya came back. April's room was small but clean, a narrow bed under a tiny window, a shared bathroom down the hall, and a uniform folded on the chair by the dresser. She traced her fingers over the fabric, wondering if it would hide her well enough. She could be invisible here, just another girl dusting shelves and changing linens. She could send money back to Detroit every week for Noah, her little brother, and maybe, for once, not feel like she was drowning. The mansion's rules were simple but strict. No one disturbed Mr. Blackwell without permission. His private wing on the 3rd floor was off limits except for Mrs. Cole, the housekeeper, who managed the staff with polite threats. Mrs. Cole explained the chain of command while handing April a list of daily duties. Her tone clipped but not unkind. Stay out of his way, mind your hours, do not gossip, do not ask questions. That was all they wanted from her. Easy enough, April thought. She had spent a lifetime staying small. What April did not know was that Damien Blackwell rarely stayed home long enough for the staff to see him. He traveled constantly between Chicago, New York, and anywhere his real estate empire demanded. Rumor among the maids was that he had no heart left to break. His last engagement had ended in a scandal so quiet no one could dig up a real reason. Mrs. Cole called him disciplined but lonely, a man whose life fit inside an iron box he'd built himself. When April caught sight of him for the first time from the back corridor, she froze by instinct. He was standing by the library window, a phone pressed to his ear. Eyes distant and mouth set in the same cold line she remembered from that night. He had not changed. The expensive suit, the perfect hair, the posture of someone who never bent for anyone. He did not see her, or maybe he did and chose not to look twice at the girl carrying a basket of fresh sheets. She ducked behind the stairwell before he turned. For hours afterward, her hands trembled as she folded towels, polished glass tables, arranged flowers that would die tomorrow. She replayed the night in her head, how warm his breath had been against her skin, how safe she had felt for a few fleeting hours she never thought she would dare feel again. Maya found her standing by the back window that evening, staring at the lake as if it could wash her secrets away. "Do not look at him too long," Maya said, half teasing, half warning. "He is not the kind of man you can stare at." April forced a laugh. She wanted to tell her friend everything, how her heart rattled in her chest when she heard his voice echo down the marble halls, how part of her wanted him to remember her while another part prayed he never would. But secrets were better kept quiet, at least for now. That night, April lay awake listening to the wind slip through the old window frame, the cold air biting at her neck. Somewhere upstairs, behind heavy doors, Damien Blackwell was probably awake too, drafting plans to buy half the city while she lay on a thin mattress wondering if she could make it through this month. She promised herself she would not get noticed, not get caught. She would clean his house, wash his floors, fold his shirts, and vanish before he ever looked close enough to see her. She owed that much to Noah, and to the piece of herself that still believed secrets could stay buried if you willed them deep enough. April settled into the routine faster than she expected. Days blended into each other, marked only by the squeak of polished floors and the distant hum of cars pulling through the gates. She rose before dawn, tied her hair back tight, slipped into her uniform, and moved from room to room like a ghost who knew better than to be seen. Sometimes she would pause at the kitchen door when Mrs. Cole discussed deliveries, or at the laundry room when Maya called to check in, but mostly she kept her head down and her hands busy. It was safer that way. For a week, Damien Blackwell barely crossed her path. He left early, came home late, and when he was home, he stayed hidden in his office or behind closed doors. The house staff whispered about his habits, how he took his coffee black, how he hated noise, how he refused to let anyone into his study unless summoned. April thought she could manage it forever. She knew how to be invisible better than anyone, but invisible girls still leave shadows, and even shadows can betray you. It was a Thursday morning when April's careful plan cracked. She was gathering laundry from the guest wing when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see Mrs. Cole or maybe one of the junior maids, but instead she found Damien standing at the end of the hallway, eyes fixed on her as if she had spoken his name out loud. He wore a dark suit, no tie, the first 2 buttons of his shirt undone. It was too early for him to be home. She felt the blood drain from her face as he took a step closer, his expression unreadable. For a second, neither of them spoke. Damien's eyes dropped to the basket in her arms, then back to her face. His gaze lingered at her throat, where the collar of her uniform dipped slightly. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but closed it again, jaw tightening. April lowered her head quickly and murmured an apology that caught in her throat. She stepped aside, hugging the basket to her chest, but as she moved past him, she felt the brush of his coat sleeve against her arm. It was a single second, but it sent a spark up her spine that left her knees weak. He did not stop her. He only watched her go, the weight of his stare pressing between her shoulder blades long after she turned the corner. That night she lay awake, replaying that moment again and again, until sleep finally pulled her under. The next morning, Mrs. Cole handed her a new task. "Mr. Blackwell wants fresh linens for his bedroom today," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp enough to pin April in place. "Be quick about it. He leaves for New York tonight." April nodded, ignoring the way her heartbeat rattled behind her ribs. She told herself it would be simple, in and out. He would not be there. He never was during the day. She knocked softly out of habit, waited, then stepped inside the massive bedroom that felt more like a hotel suite than any real place a person lived. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and expensive soap. She could almost pretend it was someone else's room, until she caught sight of the shirt draped over the back of a leather chair. She froze. It was white, crisp, but at the collar a faint smear of lipstick bloomed like an old bruise. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped closer, unable to help herself. Her fingers hovered over the fabric. She knew exactly where that stain had come from, how careless she had been that night in the hotel when she pressed her lips to his neck and left a mark she never meant to stay. A voice behind her broke the spell. "That does not belong to you." Damien's words were quiet but sharp enough to make her flinch. She spun around to find him leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her with eyes that missed nothing. She stammered an apology, but the words came out broken. He pushed off the door, stepped closer, each step slow, measured, a predator circling prey he was not sure he wanted to catch. "Why are you here?" he asked, his tone more curious than angry. April's mind raced for an answer that would not betray her shaking hands. "I was told to change the sheets, sir," she said, her voice barely steady. He looked at her for a long moment, then at the shirt she had nearly touched. He reached past her, his arm brushing her shoulder, and lifted the shirt off the chair. He turned it in his hands as if searching for something. April could not breathe. He was so close, she could smell the faint trace of his cologne, the same scent she had carried in her hair for weeks after that night. He dropped the shirt onto the bed, his eyes flicking back to hers. "Do your job," he said quietly, then stepped back, leaving the door open behind him. She thought she heard him pause in the hallway, but when she dared peek out, he was gone. April finished her task with trembling fingers. She tucked the sheets so tight the mattress creaked, folded the spare blanket just so, then fled the room before the scent of him could drown her resolve. But from that day on, something shifted. Damien came home earlier. Sometimes he lingered in the living room while April dusted the shelves nearby. Sometimes he passed her in the garden where she clipped dead blooms from the hedges. He never spoke first, but his eyes did, heavy with questions he seemed too careful to ask. One evening she was carrying a box of fresh towels up the back stairs when she found him standing at the landing, his phone to his ear, eyes locked on her as she froze 3 steps below him. He ended the call without looking away. "You look tired," he said, his tone softer than she expected. April clutched the box tighter. "I am fine, sir," she lied. But he tilted his head slightly, as if reading every line in her face. He reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers cold against her burning skin. "You should rest more," he murmured, then stepped aside to let her pass. That night, April lay awake, tracing the ghost of his touch on her cheek. She hated herself for how much she wanted more of it. The next morning brought trouble she did not see coming. April found her little brother Noah waiting by the kitchen door, pale and shivering, a backpack at his feet. He had run away from his aunt's house again, too sick to be alone, too young to understand how dangerous it was for him to be here. She pulled him into the pantry and hugged him so tightly he squeaked in protest. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, panic threading through every word. "I missed you," Noah said simply, burying his face in her shoulder. He was all bones and feverish skin. She wanted to cry, but there was no time. She made him a nest of blankets in the storage closet and promised to bring him food when she could. If Mrs. Cole found him, they would both be thrown out. If Damien found him, she could not even think that far. But secrets have a way of slipping out. 3 nights later, April was carrying a bowl of soup to Noah when she nearly slammed into Damien outside the back pantry. He looked down at the tray in her hands, then at the closet door ajar behind her. "What are you hiding, April?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. She stepped back until her shoulders hit the wall. "Please," she begged before she could stop herself. He pushed the door open and found Noah curled up on a pile of blankets, his breathing shallow, eyes wide with fear. Damien looked from the boy to April, then back again, pieces falling into place in his mind even if he did not yet know the whole story. "Get him up," Damien ordered, his voice tight. April obeyed without argument, helping Noah stand while her mind raced with excuses she knew would not work. Damien did not yell. He did not call Mrs. Cole. He only stood back and watched as April fussed over her brother, pressing a hand to his clammy forehead, whispering soft promises that everything would be okay. When Noah started to cough, Damien stepped closer, his hand brushing April's arm as he reached to lift the boy with surprising gentleness. He carried Noah through the hall as if he weighed nothing at all. April trailed behind, her heart pounding so loud she could not hear her own thoughts. Damien brought them to the guest room near his private wing, laid Noah down, and turned to April with eyes that pinned her in place. "Explain," he said, and this time his voice left no room for lies. April stood frozen near the foot of the bed, her eyes fixed on Noah's pale face as she struggled to find words that would not make everything worse. Damien leaned against the dresser, arms crossed, his gaze cold but not cruel. He did not move, did not interrupt, only waited for her excuses to run out so he could hear what was real. April drew a shaky breath. "He is my brother. His name is Noah. He has a heart condition. Our parents died when I was 16. We were staying with my aunt, but she cannot handle him, and I cannot pay for a nurse." Her voice cracked when she said the last part, shame thick in her throat. Damien's eyes flicked to Noah, who shifted weakly under the blankets, then back to April. "So you brought him here and hid him in a closet." His tone was calm, but something dangerous pulsed underneath. April lifted her chin. "I did not know what else to do. If Mrs. Cole found out, she would have fired me. I needed the money to keep him alive." Damien did not speak for a moment. The quiet in the room grew heavy, broken only by Noah's soft breathing. Finally, Damien pushed off the dresser and stepped closer, so close April could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. "Do you think I would throw a sick child out, April?" His question was soft, but it landed like a slap. She bit back tears, shaking her head. "I did not know what you would do. You do not even know me." For a heartbeat, something flickered across Damien's face, a flash of recognition buried under years of careful distance. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that night, though she did not dare believe he remembered. He turned away before she could read him, pacing once to the window and back. He stopped by Noah's side and pressed the back of his hand to the boy's forehead. His touch was gentle, unexpected. He needs a doctor. Now. April stiffened. I cannot afford. Damien cut her off with a sharp look. Did I ask you about money? He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed without waiting for an answer. April watched in stunned silence as he spoke in a low-clipped tone, calling a private physician who arrived within the hour, carrying a black leather bag and the smell of antiseptic. She sat beside Noah while the doctor examined him under Damien's watchful eye. The diagnosis was clear. Noah's condition was worsening. He needed surgery within the next few weeks, or the damage would be irreversible. April felt the floor tilt beneath her when she heard it. She had known it was bad, but hearing it spoken aloud stripped away the tiny hope she clung to. When the doctor left, Damien remained by the door, watching her gather Noah's blankets closer around his small body. April forced herself to stand, her hands trembling at her sides. I will leave. I know I have broken your trust. Just let me find another job and I will take Noah somewhere else. Damien stepped closer, his voice low enough that she felt it before she heard it. Where will you go, April? Where exactly will you hide him next? She had no answer. He knew it. She knew it. She tried to speak, but the words stuck to her tongue. Damien's hand lifted, hovering at her cheek as if he wanted to touch her, but thought better of it. You will not leave. Not with him like this. He will stay here until he is strong enough for surgery, and you will stay because he needs you. April swallowed the sob rising in her chest. Why are you doing this? He met her eyes, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw that night reflected there. He said nothing, only turned and left the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded more like a promise than an order. Days passed in a blur of hospital calls and whispered prayers. Damien arranged for the best cardiologist in Chicago, paid deposits April could not even dream of earning in a lifetime. She tried to thank him, but every time she opened her mouth he cut her off with a look that said not to ruin it with words. At night she sat by Noah's bed in the guest room, listening for Damien's footsteps in the hallway, wondering if he could hear her heart hammering through the walls. One evening she found herself in the kitchen pouring tea she did not want, her fingers shaking too much to hold the cup steady. Damien walked in without a word, reached past her for the kettle, his arm brushing hers. Neither spoke. The silence pressed between them like a confession they were too afraid to say aloud. April turned to leave, but he caught her wrist, his touch firm but not harsh. She froze as he stepped closer, so close she felt his breath on her temple. Why did you run away that night? His question cracked something inside her. She wanted to lie, but the truth slipped out before she could stop it. I was scared. I had never done anything like that before. I did not know who you were. I just wanted to feel something good for once. When I woke up, I thought you would hate me if you knew. Damien's eyes darkened as he tilted his head, studying her the same way he had in the mirror behind that bar. He lifted his hand and traced his thumb along her jaw. You left before I could ask your name. His voice was soft, a memory and an accusation all at once. April closed her eyes. I did not think you would care. He laughed, quiet and humorless. I looked for you for months. I went back to that bar every weekend until the manager told me to stop asking about a ghost. He let her wrist go as if her skin burned him. April's heart twisted. I thought you forgot me. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, the first crack in his perfect mask she had ever seen. I never forgot. I tried. I failed. He paused, his eyes flicking to the hallway where Noah lay sleeping. Is he mine? The question landed like a slap. April's eyes widened. No, God, no. He is my brother. Damien exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. For a moment, something like relief flickered across his face, quickly buried under the same careful cold. I needed to know. He turned as if to leave, but April grabbed his sleeve without thinking. Why did you keep that shirt? He stilled, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was so low she almost missed it. Because it was all I had left. He slipped from her grasp and disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, leaving her alone with the truth humming under her skin. That night she lay awake, replaying every word, every touch, every unanswered question that bound them tighter than either dared admit. By dawn she knew what she had to do. Noah would have his surgery. She would stay until he was strong enough to leave. Then she would go, because if she stayed any longer she knew her heart would not survive. The way Damien Blackwell looked at her like a question he was terrified to answer. The morning Noah went in for surgery, April stood by his bedside, holding his small, cold hand between both of hers. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and stale hope. Noah tried to smile for her, but his eyelids kept drooping shut, and every few seconds a monitor beeped softly, as if reminding April how fragile he was. Damien arrived before dawn, dressed in a dark coat and gloves, as if he planned to stand guard outside the operating room himself. He did not say much. He only nodded to April and rested his hand on Noah's shoulder for a moment before stepping back. When the nurses came to wheel Noah away, April kissed her brother's forehead and whispered promises she prayed she could keep. Damien watched her with an unreadable expression, his hands buried deep in his pockets, as if to stop himself from reaching for her. Hours crawled by in the cold waiting room. April sat hunched in a plastic chair, twisting her fingers in her lap until they ached. Damien stood near the window, phone forgotten in his pocket, eyes fixed on the gray sky outside. Every so often his gaze drifted back to her, but he never spoke first. When the surgeon finally stepped through the double doors, April jumped to her feet, her knees weak. The man's smile was tired but warm. "He will be okay. It went well? You can see him in a few hours?" Relief washed over April so fast she nearly sank to the floor. But Damien's arm was suddenly around her waist, steadying her. She let herself lean into him for a heartbeat longer than she should have before pulling away. She wanted to thank him, but the words lodged behind her teeth again. Damien's hand brushed her cheek like he might say something, but then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He let her go and stepped aside to answer it. His voice clipped and sharp. She turned away so she would not see his mask slip back into place. That night, they brought Noah back to the mansion to recover. A private nurse stayed in the guest wing, but April refused to sleep anywhere except the armchair by his bed. Damien did not argue. He only checked on them quietly, sometimes in the middle of the night, leaving half-full mugs of tea by the nightstand that April found cold by dawn. For a few days she let herself believe they had reached calm waters. She moved like a ghost again, but this time Damien watched her openly. Sometimes she caught his reflection in the glass when she cleaned the windows. Sometimes she felt his eyes on her in the garden while she watered the roses that should have died in the frost but somehow clung to life. One evening, April came down to the kitchen to find Mrs. Cole, waiting by the sink, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. The housekeeper lowered her voice, but every word landed like a knife. "You should be careful. A maid who makes the master look too long will find herself outside these gates faster than she thinks." April tried to protest, but Mrs. Cole shook her head. "He is not for you, whatever you think you feel. Whatever you think he feels. It will end badly for you both." April fled before the older woman could see the tears burning behind her eyes. She did not sleep that night. She sat by Noah's bed, tracing the lines of his face in the moonlight. He stirred once, half awake, mumbling her name, and she pressed her lips to his forehead. When dawn crept through the window, she had made her decision. She would leave. Not yet, but soon enough. She owed him his life, but she did not owe Damien her heart. The next evening, she packed a small bag and tucked it under her bed. She would find a cheaper place. Maybe take Noah back to Detroit when he was strong enough. It would be hard, but it would be theirs. She would disappear, just like she had before. The plan made sense until it fell apart. She found herself standing in Damien's study by accident 2 nights later. She had come looking for a ledger Mrs. Cole asked her to fetch, but when she stepped inside the dark wood-paneled room, she found Damien behind the desk, a half-empty glass in his hand. He looked up when she froze in the doorway. "Come in April." His voice was hoarse, as if he had been drinking words instead of whiskey. She stepped inside because leaving felt impossible when he spoke her name like that. He gestured to the chair across from him, but she did not sit. She stood there clutching the file she was supposed to deliver and tried not to stare at the way his hair fell messily over his forehead. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly, his eyes sharp but his mouth soft. April's lips parted, but no sound came out. He pushed himself up from the chair and rounded the desk, stopping only when they were close enough she could feel the heat of him. "Do you hate me, April? Do you hate that I made you stay? That I found your brother? That I kept you here when you wanted to run?" She dropped the file to the floor. Papers fanned out between their feet, but neither looked down. Her voice cracked. "I do not hate you. I hate that I do not hate you. I hate that you look at me like that when you know we cannot be anything." Damien's hand lifted to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she did not remember shedding. "Who says we cannot be anything?" The words were soft, but they scraped her open anyway. She tried to turn away, but his other hand caught her wrist, pulling her closer until her nose brushed his collarbone. She felt him breathe her in. She felt her heart betray her chest with how hard it beat. "You do not know me," she whispered against his shirt, but Damien laughed, a sound broken and raw. "I know you more than I know myself." He tipped her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You think I do not remember that night. You think I do not know it was you. You left, but you never really left me, April. I could not find you because you did not want to be found." She choked on the truth she had buried for so long. He kissed her before she could speak. It was not soft, it was not careful. It was the kiss of a man who had waited too long for something he did not know how to ask for. She let herself drown in it for one breath, 2, 3, before she pulled back, gasping, "Noah." She said the name like a shield, but Damien only smiled against her temple. "He is asleep. He is safe. So are you. So are we." She wanted to tell him no. She wanted to remind him who he was, who she was. But when he kissed her again, every reason slipped from her tongue. That night she did not sleep in the chair by Noah's bed. She did not sleep at all. She lay tangled in sheets that smelled like him, her head on his chest, listening to the thunder of his heartbeat, drowning out every fear she still carried. When morning came, she knew running was no longer an option, but staying terrified her just the same. April woke before the sun rose, tangled in sheets that smelled of him, her cheek pressed to Damien's bare shoulder as if she had belonged there forever. For a moment she let herself stay in the warmth, her eyes closed, listening to the soft rhythm of his breathing and the distant hum of the house waking below them. She could pretend nothing waited beyond this room. But pretending was a luxury she could not afford. She slipped out of bed as carefully as she could, her bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Damien stirred behind her, his hand reaching across the mattress as if to pull her back, but when he found only air, he sighed and turned onto his back, arm draped over his eyes. April dressed in silence, picking up her discarded uniform from the chair, smoothing out the wrinkles with trembling hands. She paused at the door, looking back at him once more, memorizing the way he looked without the sharp armor of his suits, just a man, asleep. His guard lowered. She wanted to crawl back under the covers, bury herself in the safety of his warmth, but the world outside did not care about safety. She stepped into the hallway, and the chill hit her immediately. She walked quietly past the guest wing to check on Noah. He was still asleep, curled on his side, breathing steady for the first time in weeks. The sight made her heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with fear, only love, raw and endless. She leaned over him and pressed a kiss to his hair, then sat by the bed for a long moment, just watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. If she could keep him safe here forever, maybe she would, but forever did not belong to girls like her. Downstairs, she found Mrs. Cole waiting by the kitchen counter, a mug of coffee in her hands, her eyes sharp even at dawn. The older woman studied April in silence for a beat too long, then spoke without pretense. "He will break you." April opened her mouth to protest, but Mrs. Cole shook her head. "Men like him do not know how to love what they cannot control." April bristled. He is not like that. Mrs. Cole arched an eyebrow. Maybe not now. Maybe not with you. But watch what happens when you stop being new, when he remembers what he is. April hated the doubt that flared in her chest, because part of her knew it was not entirely wrong. She turned away before the housekeeper could see her eyes shine. Outside, the sun was rising over the frozen lake. April stepped out onto the back terrace, pulling her sweater tight around her shoulders. The cold bit into her skin, but she welcomed it. It made her feel awake, real, less like she was living someone else's dream. She did not hear him approach until his hand settled on her shoulder, warm and solid. "You always run from my bed to the cold," Damien said behind her, his voice rough with sleep. April did not turn. "Maybe I like the cold." He stepped closer until his chest brushed her back, his arms sliding around her waist. "Or maybe you are afraid of the heat." His breath ghosted against her neck, making her shiver in ways that had nothing to do with the frost. She leaned into him before she could stop herself. Damien pressed his lips to her temple, his voice softer now. "Stay." April squeezed her eyes shut. "For how long?" He pulled back just enough to make her face him. "For as long as you want." She wanted to believe him more than she wanted air, but before she could answer, they were interrupted by the sound of footsteps crunching across the gravel. A sleek black car pulled up near the side entrance, and before April could ask Damien what was happening, a woman stepped out. Tall, elegant, wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than everything April owned combined. Her eyes landed on Damien first, then flicked to April and stayed there, cold and assessing. Damien's jaw tightened. "Mother." April's heart sank. Linda Blackwell crossed the terrace with the confidence of someone who never doubted the ground would hold her weight. She barely spared April a second glance before her eyes pinned Damien in place. "So this is where you have been hiding." Damien did not flinch. "What do you want, Mother?" Linda's smile was thin, brittle. "To see my son. To understand why he stopped answering my calls, to find out why the staff says you have been playing house with the help." April felt the sting in her chest, but Damien's hand found hers behind his back, squeezing once in warning not to speak. Linda's eyes narrowed. "You think she will last. You think a girl like her will survive this family." Damien's voice was calm, but April felt the steel in it. "She is not your concern." Linda laughed. "Everything about you is my concern, especially when it threatens the name we built." April pulled her hand free. She did not want to be the reason for this. "Mrs. Blackwell, I am sorry. I never meant—" Linda cut her off with a wave of her manicured hand. "Spare me the poor girl act. We both know why you are here. Girls like you always want something. Money, a name, a child to tie him down." April's breath caught. She looked at Damien, but he was already moving, stepping between her and his mother, his shoulders squared like a shield. "That is enough." Linda's smile vanished. "You would choose her over me? Over this family?" Damien's voice was ice. "Yes." April wanted to cry for the boy he must have been, to look his mother in the eye like that and not flinch. Linda's eyes flicked to April once more, sharp and cruel. "Then you can keep her. But do not expect me to clean up the mess when she leaves you like they all do." She turned on her heel and stalked back to her car. The silence she left behind was louder than her words. Damien turned to April then, his eyes dark with something she could not name. "Do not listen to her." April stepped back. Maybe she is right. Maybe this is a mistake. Damien closed the distance in one stride. "Do you want to leave?" Her lips trembled. "No, then do not." He pulled her into his chest, his arms like iron around her. "I do not care what she says. I do not care what they think. You are mine, April. You have been since the first night." She buried her face in his shirt, breathing him in like she could inhale his promises and make them true. But in the corner of her mind, doubt curled like smoke. That night she packed her bag again, but left it under the bed untouched. She lay beside him in the dark, tracing the lines of his chest with her fingertips. Damien caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Do not run," he murmured. She whispered back so softly he almost missed it. "Then do not let me go." A month later, the lake thawed, spilling silver ripples beneath a sky that promised spring. April stood barefoot on the back terrace, her hair loose around her shoulders as she watched Noah chase a paper kite across the lawn. His laughter rose like music, a sound she had not dared hope to hear again when hospital rooms and whispered prayers were all she had. Behind her, the sliding door opened with a soft click and Damien stepped out carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed her one without a word and stood beside her, his free hand brushing hers until their fingers twined together. She felt his warmth sink into her skin, steady and certain like he had been every day since she let herself stop running. They did not speak about Linda anymore. She had returned to her penthouse in New York, leaving behind only sharp words and the echo of threats she no longer had the power to keep. Damien's grandmother Eleanor visited instead, her smile soft and genuine as she pressed a kiss to April's cheek and reminded her to rest. Rest was not something April understood yet, but she was learning. Noah grew stronger every day, his footsteps louder, his smile wider. Sometimes he would run to Damien and tug at his sleeve, demanding help with his homework or his kite or anything he decided his new guardian must fix. Damien never said no. He only knelt down, sleeves rolled, voice soft in ways April once thought impossible. When the wind lifted the kite too high and it tumbled into the lake, Noah squealed and Damien chased him across the yard, splashing water onto his tailored pants without a second thought. April watched them both and felt something inside her settle like warm honey in her chest. That evening they ate dinner in the sunroom, glass walls catching the last gold of the day. April sat between Noah and Damien, listening to their laughter weave around her like a promise she could finally believe in. After Noah fell asleep, Damien led her outside again, down the narrow stone path to the small dock that stretched over the water. The moon rose soft and shy above them, catching on the ripples where they stood shoulder to shoulder. Damien turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the silver sky. "I am not good with words, you know that by now." April smiled, her fingers brushing his knuckles. "I know." He exhaled slowly like he had been carrying something heavy for too long. "That night in Chicago, you looked at me like I was a man, not a name. You left before I could thank you for that." April's throat tightened. "I never wanted anything from you," Damien laughed under his breath, soft and hoarse. "I know. That is why I want to give you everything." He reached into his pocket, and when he dropped to one knee, the world seemed to hold its breath with her. The ring he held was simple, a band of gold and a tiny diamond that caught the moonlight like a secret. "Marry me, April. Stay with me. Stay with us." She felt tears slip free before she could stop them. "Yes." Her voice broke like dawn over water. "Yes." Damien rose and pulled her into his chest, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted of winter melting into spring. Behind them, the house glowed warm with the light of a life they would build together. Noah slept safe in his bed, the lake whispered beneath their feet, and the world spun on, patient and endless. April Summers knew now that love could find you when you least deserved it and stay when you least believed it would. She would never run again because she had found her home, not in marble halls or lakefront mansions, but in the quiet strength of the man who had once been a stranger on a snowy night and who now stood beside her, unshakable and hers. Love heals what fear tries to bury. It finds you in the dark, pulls you close, and reminds you there is always something worth staying for.